The moment the door swung open, I knew I was done. But the look on his face? It was something I never saw coming. I was tangled in the sheets with him, the man I couldn't resist, the man I had been hiding from my husband for months. And when I saw my husband standing there, frozen in the doorway, I didn't panic. No, I didn't scream. I didn't even try to hide. Instead, I did something I'll never forget. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Could you bring us drinks?" Yes, you heard that right. I asked him to bring us drinks. You'd think I'd be ashamed. But instead, all I could feel was power. What do you do when you're caught red-handed yet you feel no guilt? Let me tell you, I'm not proud of what happened, but I can't say I regret it either. The truth is, when you're caught in the middle of something forbidden, you don't think about the consequences right away. You just feel. Before everything blew up, my life had been predictable, comfortable even. My husband and I had been together for 7 years. We had everything we needed. A nice house, a stable life, a loving marriage. But something was missing. Maybe it was the excitement. Maybe it was the attention. Or maybe I just got tired of being the perfect wife. The truth is, I didn't know what I was looking for when I met him, the lover. His name was Ethan. He was everything my husband wasn't. Charismatic, passionate, spontaneous. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And it started innocently enough, just an innocent flirtation at work. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. At first, I tried to fight it. I didn't want to ruin my marriage. I didn't want to destroy everything I had built. But with every stolen glance, every lingering touch, it became impossible to resist. The first time I kissed him, it felt like the world stopped. And from that moment on, there was no going back. But that day when my husband came home early and found us together in our bed, that was when everything changed. That was the moment I had been dreading, and the one I secretly craved. Why? Because the truth has a way of coming out, even when you're not ready for it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I had planned everything meticulously, timing, location, even how to make sure my husband wouldn't suspect a thing. But I never anticipated him coming home early that day. The sound of the door opening caught me off guard. I looked over at Ethan, his face painted with surprise, but we didn't move. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of my husband's footsteps. He was here. For a split second, time slowed down. My heart raced. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the tension in the air. And then there he was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide, his face pale. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His face said it all. I should have been scared, ashamed. I should have begged him for forgiveness, run to him with tears in my eyes. But instead, I just stared at him, sitting there next to Ethan, his arms still around me, and I smiled. "Could you bring us drinks?" I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, his eyes locked on me, trying to process what was happening. I think it was the absurdity of the situation that made me feel in control. I wasn't the one running, I wasn't the one begging. And it was in that moment that I knew I had him. I had both of them. Can you imagine being caught in the most humiliating moment of your life and still feeling like you hold the power? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you apologize? Or would you lean in? He didn't move for what felt like forever. The silence in the room was suffocating, the tension unbearable. I could see the anger in his eyes, but there was also confusion. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to react. And I couldn't help but feel this strange thrill. It wasn't guilt, not in the way you'd expect. Instead, it was like I was watching the whole thing unfold from a distance, as if I was somehow above it all. Eventually, he broke the silence. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it was laced with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" "I think you know," I said, my tone ice cold. I wasn't looking at him, I was looking at Ethan, his hand still on my waist. He swallowed hard, his fists clenched by his sides. "I trusted you. I didn't ask you to trust me," I replied. My voice was a bit too casual for the situation, but I couldn't help it. "You've been gone so much, so busy with your work. I needed something more." And I found it with him. There it was, the truth. Out in the open, he didn't know what to say. "Is this what you've been doing all these months?" he asked, his voice rising. "Is this how you repay me for everything I've done for you?" I didn't answer right away, Part of me felt like I should apologize, should say something to ease the sting, but another part of me just didn't care. Finally, I said, maybe it's not about what you did for me. Maybe it's about what I wanted. I saw his face fall. He was stunned, speechless. But Ethan was looking at him with a strange mixture of pity and amusement, and that was when I realized it wasn't just me who had crossed the line. It was us. All of us. What would you do if your partner cheated on you? Would you fight for them? Or would you walk away, knowing that everything you thought was true was just a lie? He didn't say anything for a long time after that. He just stood there, his eyes darting between me and Ethan. I knew it was coming. I knew he was going to say something about leaving, about how everything had been destroyed. But then, just as quickly, the rage seemed to drain from him. He took a step back, his face softening. "You don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. "You think this is some game. You think you can just play with people's hearts and walk away unscathed. But this isn't a game, and you're going to regret this." He wasn't wrong. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to feel bad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. And for the first time in months, I realized I didn't need him anymore. I didn't need either of them. But there was one thing left to do. One final question that had to be asked. Who would I choose? The man I had betrayed, or the man I had chosen to betray him for? In the end, my husband walked out. He didn't scream. He didn't break anything. He just left. And as he walked out the door, I felt nothing, except relief. As for Ethan, he stayed, but it didn't last long. He had what he wanted. He didn't need me anymore. And before long, he disappeared too. And there I was, alone in the house I had once shared with a man who was no longer my husband. But I wasn't sad, not anymore. In fact, I had never felt more alive. Do you think I'll ever regret this? Maybe. But for now, I'm just enjoying the freedom. After that night, everything changed. The silence in the house was deafening. My husband was gone, and Ethan wasn't coming back. It wasn't that I missed either of them, no. It was the absence of chaos, the absence of the lies that left me feeling hollow. And it wasn't just any hollow feeling. It was the kind of emptiness that comes when you realize there's no turning back. It had been my choice. I had made that decision, every step of the way. And now, sitting alone in the bedroom where it all happened, I couldn't help but ask myself, was it worth it? At first, the answer seemed clear. Yes, it was worth it. I was free. But with that freedom came the weight of truth and the brutal honesty that I couldn't hide from anymore. I had destroyed my marriage. I had destroyed him. And for what? For a fleeting thrill, a momentary escape. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I was no longer playing the role of the dutiful wife. I wasn't trapped in a life that had suffocated me for too long. I was myself, but the question still lingered in my mind. Was it worth it? What's more dangerous than a woman who's realized she doesn't need anyone? The freedom to choose, even when the consequences come crashing down. A few days after the fallout, I received a call from him, my husband. It was late at night, the kind of hour when the world feels empty, when the weight of everything that's happened starts to sink in. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me knew I had to. I didn't say anything at first. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. You really don't regret it, do you? His voice was raw, and there was a tremor in it. Fear, pain, disbelief. I hesitated, feeling the truth clawing at me, but I didn't back down. No, I don't. And there it was. I didn't regret it. I didn't regret the affair, the betrayal. But what I did regret was the fact that I had let it go on for so long, not just with him, but with myself. There was no going back. The damage was done. Can you imagine having the power to end something, knowing that it will never be the same again? It's a strange thing to feel, this sudden freedom, mixed with a deep sense of loss. The next few days were filled with unexpected aftershocks. I hadn't expected him to be so calm in the face of what had happened. There were no emotional outbursts, no attempts to manipulate me into coming back. Instead, he gave me the space I asked for. I started to wonder if he had already moved on, or if he had simply given up. But that thought stung more than I expected. What's worse? Being cheated on, or realizing that your spouse has already emotionally checked out, long before you did? One evening, I found myself standing in front of our old house, the place where we had once shared our dreams. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, an apology, a reunion, or just the chance to see him one last time. But when I rang the doorbell, it wasn't my husband who opened the door. It was a woman. She looked at me for a moment, then glanced over her shoulder. I could hear his voice faintly in the background, but I didn't hear the words. He had moved on. My stomach twisted with something I didn't expect: jealousy. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. The woman was polite, too polite for my liking. She didn't seem like she wanted to engage in some petty confrontation. She just stood there, waiting for me to say something. And I wanted to. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her what I had done, to let her know that I wasn't the victim here. I wasn't the wronged wife. No, I was the one who had torn apart everything, but I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked away. Have you ever been so consumed by your own actions that you can't even recognize yourself anymore? That's when you realize the worst betrayal isn't just cheating, it's when you've betrayed yourself. There were nights, after all the dust settled, when I would lie awake in bed, thinking about what I had done. There were no more lovers to sneak into my bed, no more adrenaline-fueled rendezvous. It was just me, alone, in the silence of my choices. And that silence was louder than anything I had ever experienced. I began to understand why people cheat. It wasn't about just the other person. It wasn't just about escaping from a marriage. It was about feeling alive again, feeling desired, feeling wanted in a way that didn't seem possible in the world I had built with my husband. I could never go back to that life, but I also knew I couldn't move forward the way I had been. The betrayal wasn't just to him, it was to myself, to the woman I thought I was, this perfect, loving wife. She didn't exist anymore. She had been replaced by someone who was desperate for attention, desperate for a thrill. And now I had to face the truth. I was no longer the person I once was. The price of freedom isn't always worth it. Sometimes freedom leaves you feeling emptier than the life you tried to escape. But once you've tasted it, there's no going back. Months passed. The dust settled. My husband moved on. I moved on. I'd even started dating again, though I couldn't quite shake the memory of Ethan, the passion, the fire. But the truth was, I didn't need either of them. Not anymore. I was starting to realize that the one person I had neglected all these years was myself. And for the first time, I was okay with that. So here's the truth I've learned from everything that's happened. Sometimes you have to destroy a part of yourself to rebuild something stronger. Sometimes you have to walk through the fire to know who you really are. And even when the world burns around you, you can still rise from the ashes, because the power was yours all along. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's not what most people expect when they think of infidelity, but this is the reality of what happens when we ignore our own needs and our own desires. If you've ever been through something like this, or if you've had to face your own mistakes, I'd love to hear your story. Let's talk about it. Let's understand how we all, in some way, fight for our freedom and struggle with the consequences. Remember, you're never as trapped as you think.